He thought he was untouchable. A billionaire used to being feared and admired. But one casual question at his favorite restaurant would change everything. "How about giving me some financial advice along with that water?" he asked, smirking, thinking it was just a joke. What happened next left him completely speechless. She was just a waitress, or so he thought. In the next few seconds, the man who controlled billions would realize some people should never be underestimated. Quick cut to David Richmond's shocked face as Keisha begins her financial breakdown, her voice calm, precise, and confident. Music swells. This is the story of the waitress who outsmarted a billionaire and changed everything. In the heart of Manhattan, nestled between glass towers and the hum of expensive cars, stood Chateau Laurent, a restaurant that catered only to the elite. A place where the rich dined and the rest served. That night, billionaire investor David Richmond sat at his usual corner table, surrounded by men who measured their worth in millions. He didn't look up when the waitress approached, a young black woman named Keisha Williams, her expression calm, her posture perfect. "How about giving me some financial advice along with that water?" David said, smirking, his eyes still glued to his phone. His friends chuckled. The joke landed exactly where he wanted, beneath him, but Keisha didn't laugh. She paused, the crystal pitcher hovering in midair. And then, in a voice so composed it silenced the room, she said, "I'd invest 40% in emerging market ETFs focused on sustainable energy, 25% in undervalued medical technology stocks, 20% in commercial real estate in secondary metro areas, 10% in agricultural commodities as an inflation hedge, and keep 5% liquid for arbitrage opportunities." The sound of the restaurant vanished, just silence. David finally looked up. "What did you just say?" Keisha's expression didn't change. "You asked for financial advice, sir." "I just gave it." All around, executives stopped mid-conversation. Even the maître d' froze. David Richmond, the self-proclaimed genius of Wall Street, had just been schooled by a waitress. That night, something shifted inside David. For the first time in years, he was intrigued and humiliated. As Keisha walked away, her steps graceful and sure, David whispered to his partner, "Find out everything about her. Name, background, where she went to school, everything." 3 days later, his private investigator returned with a file that made no sense. Keisha Williams, 28, no criminal record, community college degree, no trace of any career in finance. To David, it was impossible. No one spoke like that without years of experience. But what David didn't know was that the file was a lie, carefully planted by Keisha herself. Because behind the uniform and polite smile was a woman once hailed as one of Wall Street's brightest minds. Keisha had been a senior quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs, developing algorithms that generated over $200 million in profits until the day she was betrayed. Falsely accused of insider trading by her supervisor, a man who needed a scapegoat when the SEC came knocking. Though never convicted, her reputation was destroyed. The firms she helped build turned their backs. Her name blacklisted, her savings gone. She had become invisible, until that night when David Richmond gave her a stage to begin again. Over the next few weeks, David began to frequent the restaurant, always sitting in her section. He'd ask casual questions about the market, trying to expose her. "So, Keisha," he'd say with mock curiosity, "what's your take on the Asian currency instability?" And when she answered, he'd twist his lips into a smile, waiting for her to trip. One evening, she deliberately gave a wrong answer. David laughed loud and cruel. "See, gentlemen? That's why we leave finance to the professionals." The laughter that followed filled the room. Keisha lowered her eyes and walked away, calm on the outside, calculating on the inside. Because while David thought he was exposing her ignorance, she was studying him. Every word, every phone call, every careless mention of a merger or acquisition, she absorbed it all. She wasn't just serving him water. She was collecting evidence. Soon, the puzzle began to fit together. Suspicious trading patterns, confidential details leaking before public announcements. David Richmond wasn't just arrogant, he was corrupt. Keisha reached out to an old ally, Marcus Chun, a former colleague turned independent consultant. "Richmond is investigating you," Marcus warned. Keisha smiled. "Good," He's seeing exactly what I want him to see. 3 weeks later, the trap was ready. David Richmond stood before his investors, unveiling what he called the deal of the century, a $2.8 billion takeover that would cement his legacy. As the investors applauded, the conference room door opened. Every head turned. Kesha Williams walked in. No uniform this time, just an elegant black suit that commanded attention. "Apologies for the interruption," she said, her tone cool and precise. "But before you finalize this deal, there's something you should know." David froze. "What the hell are you doing here?" Kesha placed a briefcase on the table. "I'm here to clear up some misunderstandings and about who I really am." She opened the case, revealing neatly stacked documents. "My name is Kesha Williams. For 5 years, I worked as a senior analyst at Goldman Sachs, specializing in detecting financial fraud. The man you've trusted with your investments," she said, turning to the investors, "has been using insider information to manipulate markets for years." David stood up. "That's a lie." Kesha smiled faintly and opened her laptop. "Then you might want to explain this recording." David's voice filled the room. "Just make sure they can't trace it back to our source at the SEC." The color drained from his face. Gasps filled the room. Investors whispered. Some stood to leave. Kesha continued, laying out documents, emails, transaction logs, evidence that painted a devastating picture of Richmond investments. "I've already shared these with the SEC, the FBI, and the Wall Street Journal," she said calmly. "Tomorrow's headline will read, 'Richmond Investments Exposed in Insider Trading Scandal.'" David sank into his chair. You've destroyed me." Kesha looked at him with quiet strength. "No, David, you destroyed yourself. I just held up the mirror." Soft, dramatic music swells. That day, David Richmond's empire collapsed. His investors fled. His name became synonymous with greed and disgrace, and the waitress he tried to humiliate became the headline of every financial newspaper in America. 6 months later, on the 35th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, Kesha Williams stood by the window of her new office. The plaque on the door read, "Williams Financial Consulting, CEO and founder." Her company had already signed contracts with some of the biggest funds on the East Coast. The Wall Street Journal called her the analyst who toppled an empire. Marcus walked in, champagne in hand. "Richmond's sentence just came down," he said. 15 years in prison." Kesha smiled faintly. "Justice served cold." She looked out at the city, the same city that had once turned its back on her. "He thought humiliating people made him powerful," she whispered. "But arrogance is just the mask of fear." The story of Kesha Williams spread far beyond Wall Street. Universities studied her case under a new name, the Richmond Syndrome. A lesson in how underestimating people can cost everything. At Chateau Laurent, the maitre d' renamed a dish in her honor. Justice served cold. And David Richmond, once a symbol of untouchable success, spent his days behind bars, haunted by the memory of the waitress who outsmarted him. Because sometimes, the most dangerous minds aren't sitting at the head of the table. They're standing quietly beside it, waiting for the perfect moment to turn the game around.